I enjoyed Dynamite this week. I thought it was their best episode in a long time, and Collision was just as good last night. Ricochet beat Swerve Strickland in the main event in Atlanta on Dynamite off of a questionable low blow as Swerve came off the top rope for a Swerve stomp. And then Ricochet wiped him out with the spirit gun and pinned him. He pinned a former AEW world champion. And then after the match was over, he stole Prince Nana's embassy robe that Swerve wore to the ring. He wears it out there for all of his big matches. And Ricochet put it on, and he left with it. I thought it was a good match. Clearly, it was designed to be the first match. And we are probably getting a gimmick match of some kind at Revolution. They shot an angle at the Defy Wrestling show in Seattle on Friday night with Ricochet making an unannounced appearance. He entered to Swerve's theme music while wearing the embassy robe that he stole on Wednesday. Swerve has been a staple in Defy for many, many years. Obviously, he's from the Seattle area. But the lights went out when they came back on. Swerve was standing in the not in the middle of the ring, but he was standing in the ring behind him. And Ricochet turned around and saw him. The two of them brawled. Ricochet escaped. He shoved Prince Nana into Swerve. He ran away. I like it. I like that they found a way to stretch the angle out across different promotions. I think that's cool. They aired the footage on Collision last night, so I love that kind of thing. On Wednesday, they had Toni Storm out there dressed up, cosplaying as Mariah May. Timeless glamour. And it was freaky watching it. But she was out there dressed up as Mariah. Mariah didn't like that very much. It's the same thing we've seen Mariah do many, many, many months ago, right? Last year when she was dressed up as punk rocker Toni Storm. Now she's giving Mariah a taste of her own medicine. So that was a great angle I thought that they did on Wednesday. And then last night on Collision, Mariah had a match. It was very quick. It was a quick squash. And her opponent was dressed up to look very much like timeless Toni Storm. When the match was over, she started, she put a shirt on her to make her look like, timeless Toni. And she started, drawing on her face with the lipstick and everything. But we had the return of Luther. Luther came out and he had something on a plate and it was covered. We couldn't see what it was. And he gets up on the apron and he pulls the sheet off and it's the white shoe, the bloody shoe that Mariah had used on Toni last year on Dynamite when she turned on her. So then Mariah grabbed the shoe and was going to tried to use it on Luther. He ducked out of the way. She was going to turn around and use it on her opponent, but Toni Storm had slipped into the ring in place of the opponent, which Mariah then realized. And then they had a brawl. Mariah got away. She got into the crowd. So two really good angles on TV this week to build to one of the matches I am most looking forward to this weekend coming up, big rematch between the two of them. Everything they've done with these two, I think, has been great. On Dynamite Wednesday, we had Powerhouse Hobbs back. Remember, he was kept off the show the week before. He still wasn't medically cleared. So he was back this week. I think basically what they did probably on Wednesday was shoot the angle they were going to the week before. But it was him, and he came out to confront Big Bill. And they had a pull-apart brawl. They each choke slammed different security guys and then, went back after each other. Just, two big dudes going at it and beating the crap out of each other. And the more that they feature Hobbs on the show, the more consistently that they feature him on the show, the better. Big Bill, they've been teasing an upcoming split from the Learning Tree with him and Chris Jericho. They're building to it slowly, but when that day comes, same logic applies to Big Bill. You can shoot a great angle and have him split away from Chris Jericho and even beat Jericho in a match. What matters is what follows that. Chris Jericho has done jobs for people before. He did fucking jobs for Action Andretti and Ricky Starks and people. It doesn't matter so much as what happens after the fact. So if we end up in a situation where Chris Jericho is still being featured every week on TV and Big Bill is not, there's a problem there. But so far, they're doing the right thing with Hobbs as far as getting him on the show every week. They need to follow that same battle plan for Big Bill when the time comes because, both guys very talented and both guys, I think, could be something. How high, can they go? What is their ceiling on the roster? I don't know. I think it can be pretty high. But it's all about, the repetitions and getting them consistently on television and making sure that people don't forget about them. There was a great tag team match on Wednesday. They had the Hounds of Hell Buddy Matthews and Brody King taking on the Callis family, Kyle Fletcher and Konosuke Takeshita. You knew they were going to win because they're the ones wrestling Omega and Ospreay this weekend in Australia. So Brody King took the pin in that match. They threw everything at this guy. It took everything to finally put him down. You couldn't pin Buddy because Buddy's got a Continental title match coming up with Okada. But it was a great match. And the best part about Dynamite, they kept the Death Riders to a minimum. No Jeff Jarrett on the show, and they kept the Death Riders to a minimum. It was one segment at the beginning of the show that was inoffensive, and that was it. Now, they did have a match. It was going to be Will Ospreay against a mystery member of the Don Callis family. Everybody was wondering all week, who's it going to be? Is it a new member? Is it the return of Trent Beretta? It was Mark Davis. And they tried to explain this, or have Callis explain this on commentary, by saying that when Davis was down with an injury, he gave power of attorney to Kyle Fletcher to make all decisions for their team. And that he being Callis, is the one who brought them into AEW and basically had them under contract. And so he owns Mark Davis. Of course, it's ridiculous because it doesn't account for why Mark Davis came back a few months ago and has been fighting the Callis family almost every week ever since. Now, all of a sudden, Don Callis is forcing him to do his bidding because he owns him. Right? The reason they did this is because they only just came up with this idea. So now they're trying to retrofit it. So that explanation just didn't wash. It's ridiculous. But, that was what they came up with. MJF and Hangman, we've seen them bump into each other a few times over the last several weeks. They did again on Wednesday because we had Hangman was chasing Max Caster all over the building. And MJF was in the ring when Caster got into the ring, but it looked like he was flustered, like he was running away from somebody. And he said, Hangman, Hangman. So then Hangman came out after him, but of course he ended up face-to-face with Max. And no physicality. And Hangman left the ring and went to chase Max Caster off into the crowd. But it's just another indication of what is yet to come between these two men. And so while MJF is working the senior circuit and doing stuff with Dustin Rhodes and Jeff Jarrett, Hangman and MJF is what intrigues me. We have not gotten a proper feud, a proper program between these two yet. Two AEW originals that have been there from day one. And they can use this feud. I think it'll be a very important way to transition Hangman back to the babyface role. We've seen signs of it already, right? He's been showing signs or hints of remorse or regret for some of the things that he's done. He's been looking for Swerve Strickland. Popped into his locker room a couple of weeks ago, and Renee said, "What are you doing?" He goes, "Oh, don't ask me. It's none of your business." Or the look he had on his face when Christopher Daniels said that, because of the Texas death match that we had and what you did to me, the doctors have advised me that I shouldn't wrestle again, so my career is over. And he had that look on his face for a few moments there, like maybe he regretted, what he had done. So there's been hints of it. This feud, though, a feud with MJF, is exactly, I think, what he needs to help transition him fully back into the babyface role. And it would do wonders for MJF, who hasn't done a whole hell of a lot since coming back last year. Outside of the program with Will Ospreay, they had those two great matches. Outside of that, MJF has done virtually nothing. He is floundering right now. This could be just what he needs. I would go so far as to say that if Tony Khan does this right, this can end up being one of the most important programs. I didn't just say best. I said important programs on AEW television all year. He cannot fuck this up. I mentioned Collision was also a really good show this week. They had the return of Bandido on Collision. He had a match against the bounty hunter, Brian Keith, who's from Texas, and they were in Texas. But the Texas crowd was hot all night. They were just hot for this match. They were hot for the entire show. I think Meltzer said something along these lines, and I agree. I wish they could bottle this Texas crowd up and just take it with them everywhere they go. Every week, whatever city they go to, just take that Texas crowd and bring it to every Dynamite, every Collision, every pay-per-view, because they were great last night. But they did this spot that got over really well. I would love to know who came up with this spot. Where they ended up back-to-back, like they kind of bumped backs late in the match, and they stopped, and they got a great close-up camera shot as they both tilted their heads. They turned their heads to kind of look back at the other, and then they nodded in agreement. And then they started to take 10 paces towards the corners, like a battle at high noon in the Old West. And they each went to a corner, and they turned around, and they came charging in, and they wiped each other out with big boots, and everybody in the building lost their minds. It's a great spot. And Bandido picks up the win with the 21-plex. His first match back, he's had a rough go of it because he broke his wrist. I guess it was last year, right? He broke his wrist. Or was it last year? It might have been 2 years ago. He was out for a long time. I think he broke his wrist in 23 and had surgery and then didn't heal properly and needed a second surgery. So that kept him out even longer. And then he finally gets medically cleared, and it was at one of the, maybe it was Final Battle. It was one of the Hammerstein shows. He came back. He was about to start a program with Chris Jericho. And his very first move, he did a springboard into the ring, fell on his back, and smacked the back of his head so hard on the mat that he concussed himself. So he was out for a few more weeks. So thankfully, he made it out unscathed and healthy last night. But he's had a rough go of it with the injuries. But you saw how hot the crowd was for him. And he was getting reactions like that before he got hurt the first time. So I'm glad to see that despite all of the time that he missed, which could be a career killer, it didn't take all that much to get the people right back behind him. He's a special talent. And if they put their weight behind him, he could go far there. They had a segment where Harley Cameron was in concert, singing some songs, playing the guitar. She's been trying to convince Mercedes Moné to give her a TBS title match at Grand Slam. She's from Australia, so it would be a big homecoming for her. Harley, of course, had not, up until, I think, Collision last weekend, had not won a single match her entire time in AEW, and she's been there for a few years now. Only on Collision a few weeks ago did she finally notch her first win over Taya Valkyrie. Because Mercedes brought that up a couple weeks ago and said, you've never won a match. Why would I give you a TBS title match? And you know what? She made sense. But thankfully, they did away with their fucking rankings a long time ago, because if they still had the rankings, ain't no way that Harley Cameron would be getting a title shot. But the rankings were just holding them back and not doing them any good. When there is a story that calls for it, you give somebody a title shot. And in this case, the fans have taken a liking to Harley Cameron. She's very entertaining. She's very outgoing. She could do it all. And Mercedes came out, interrupted her concert. They had a back and forth. And when it was over, Mercedes agreed to give her a match and said, okay, you want to face me for my title in Australia at Grand Slam? You got it. So I thought the segment, it served its purpose. We have the title match now. That's official. I don't expect Harley to win the championship. I do think there's a longer term story there if they want to tell that story, though, where Harley could very well end up being the person to beat Mercedes to win that title. But that's so far down the road that would happen. I don't know about keeping the title on Mercedes for that much longer. Like, honestly, she's going to be champion for a year when we hit Double or Nothing. And that sounds about right as far as getting that belt off of her and onto somebody else. But there is a longer term story with Harley Cameron that I think the fans would get behind because they genuinely like her. Thunder Rosa and Megan Bayne appear to be starting a feud. We had Megan Bayne. She was not on Dynamite, but she did appear on Collision, and she shot an angle where after Thunder Rosa's match, she came to the ring and laid her out with an F5. So they're getting something going between the two of them. And then Kyle Fletcher got the main event spot against Mark Briscoe. This was a rematch from their first meeting in the Continental Classic, which Briscoe won. Fletcher got his win back here, but they had a great match. Did this crazy spot, too, late in the match where Fletcher was outside the ring. There was a table. And I don't think he was laid out on the table. But he was like standing in front of the table. And Briscoe came off the top rope to the floor with a froggy bow. And as he's diving off the top, like Fletcher had to time it just right, but he jumped up into the air to take the froggy bow and then crash through the table. So it got over huge. It was a great spot, but in the end, Fletcher picks up the win, trying to keep him strong going into Grand Slam. Look, I mean, it wouldn't shock me if they, gave the heels the win and had him get a pin on Ospreay in the tag match. I'm still going with the baby faces to win. But that's huge for Kyle Fletcher, to be in a match like that. He's going to be back home and, it may end up being the biggest match of his career. So it's going to be a big night for him. But he's another one, we see different people on this roster. Like, the pieces are all there. You just hope that Tony Khan can fit them in where they belong and push them the right way. I mentioned Powerhouse Hobbs. I mentioned Big Bill. You look at someone like Harley Cameron, who's gotten over organically. The fans genuinely like her, and she's very talented. They just signed Megan Bain, who looks like an absolute rock star. I mean, I from the moment she came into House of Glory and she won our championship, I mean, just her presence, and her gear, and she walks out there and she stands and she just looks like a superstar. And so now they've got her on TV. And you see someone like Kyle Fletcher, who's broken out on his own. He was in a tag team. He's broken out on his own. He shaved his head. He didn't want to look like Will Ospreay. He didn't want to look like anybody else. He wanted to kind of forge his own path. And he had a great showing, even though he didn't win the Continental Classic. He had a great showing in that tournament. And they're taking steps with him to turn him into a real star. And so far, so good. I think the fans are buying into it. He certainly has all the talent in the world in ring, bell to bell, to make it work. Somebody, and I don't remember who it was, if it was a tweet or an email, but somebody made a comment. They made a comparison. They said, is he to Tony Khan, what Randy Orton, what WWE and Vince McMahon made Randy Orton, where he's kind of the young stud that they get behind, who just has this special talent in the ring, bell to bell, maybe kind of a similar look, but they made the Randy Orton comparison. I don't like making that comparison because, again, I don't look at Kyle Fletcher and say, oh, he could be the next Randy Orton. Kyle Fletcher can be the next Kyle Fletcher. And you're already, kind of putting him at a handicap when you make a comparison like that. It's like making a comparison to any other big name in wrestling. Those are big boots to fill, and I think it's kind of unfair. I get what the person is saying, though, and I think it's a huge compliment. He's not there yet, but he could end up being someone like that, for Tony Khan. Again, far down the road. But right now, it's about trying to get these people over. They have to try to make new stars to go along with the stars they already have. And the people are there. The talent is there. It's just about continuing to get them featured on TV and booking them the right way. Easier said than done. And we've seen what Tony Khan has done with certain other people on the roster, and it's not good. But if he can take the right steps with some of these people, 6 months from now or a year from now, they can be in a position where people look at them as true main event players. And that's what he needs. That's what he needs to continue doing.